was standing on the observation deck of the Meridian throne when the first human ship dropped out of fold space. Not glided, not transitioned, dropped. Like someone had cut a string on a heavy thing and just let it fall. I remember the sound it made, and you have to understand, sound doesn't travel in vacuum. I know that, everyone knows that. But the Meridian throne had external resonance pickups because our admiral liked to hear battles, said it helped him think. And those pickups caught the fold collapse ripple, and the bridge speakers turned that ripple into something that sounded like a mountain cracking open underground. Deep, low, wrong in some way I couldn't name. The ship that came through was the ICCNS Perseverance. I'd seen the intelligence file on human vessels 3 weeks prior. The analysts had flagged them as Tier 4 developmental, meaning roughly equivalent to a species that had just discovered artificial gravity and was still working out the math on plasma containment. Their ships were supposed to be slow, armored more with optimism than actual hull plating. Their weapons were supposed to be adequate. The word used in the file was adequate. I remember because I remember everything. Memory is the one gift my species was given in abundance, and the word adequate was underlined. The Perseverance was not adequate. She was ugly, first of all. You have to understand, galactic conclave ships are built along certain aesthetic principles. Form follows function, yes, but function itself has been refined over 6,000 years of interstellar engineering. Our vessels look like they were grown, like someone figured out the mathematically ideal shape for a warship and then spent centuries perfecting the curves. The Ryathi cruisers look like deep-sea creatures from a world with violet oceans. The Veth battleships look like frozen lightning. Even the Drows and frigates, which everyone agrees are the least elegant things in the fleet, at least have the dignity of bilateral symmetry. The Perseverance looked like someone had been building a warship and then kept deciding to add more things to it. There were antenna arrays bolted at angles that suggested they'd been added after the fact. There was a secondary hull section near the stern that didn't quite match the primary hull plating, slightly different shade of gray, slightly different texture, like a scar. There were weapon pods on the dorsal surface that pointed in directions that made my tactical instincts itch. There were streaks of something dark along the port side that might have been carbon scoring from a previous engagement and might have been something the crew had spilled and not cleaned up. She was 340 meters long, and she moved through space like she didn't care what space thought about it. "Contact," said Lieutenant Vers from the sensor station. His voice was perfectly controlled, because Vers was always perfectly controlled, because Vers had been through 11 major engagements and 3 of them should have killed him, and he'd responded to all of that by becoming the most unflappable being I'd ever met. Single vessel, human configuration. She's in communication range. "Open a channel," Admiral Marin Sulith said. Sulith was old. She'd been old when I joined her command 8 years ago, and she'd somehow gotten more old in the years since without actually showing it, if that makes sense. She was old the way a stone cliff face is old, not fragile, not crumbling, just worn into something harder than it started. She stood at the center of the bridge with her hands clasped behind her back, and she looked at the Perseverance on the view screen, the way a person looks at a thing they haven't decided about yet. The channel opened. And then we heard them for the first time. Not the voice, the background. Before whoever was on the other end of that channel said a single word, we heard, and this is not an exaggeration, I am telling you exactly what the audio logs record, we heard someone laughing. Somewhere off mic, somewhere in the background of whatever compartment they were transmitting from, a human was laughing at something, and it was a big laugh. The kind that meant the person doing it had forgotten for a moment to be professional. Then a thud, like someone had been elbowed. Then silence. Then a voice. "This is Captain Yusra Okonkwo Believe of the ICCNS Perseverance, representing the Interplanetary Coalition of Cooperative Nations, Earth. We are here in response to the Conclave's request for auxiliary combat support in the Varith campaign. We have one ship, 412 personnel, and we are told you people have a problem that needs solving. So, a pause. What's the problem? Vers turned from his station and looked at me. I looked at him. We both looked at Admiral Sulith. Sulith hadn't moved. She was still looking at the Perseverance on the view screen. Her expression had shifted slightly. I'd worked with her long enough to read those shifts, and this one said interesting. Put them in holding formation at grid 7, she said finally. And tell Commander Rose to meet me in the tactical bay. I want to be the one who briefs the humans. I went to that briefing. It was technically outside my duties. I was the Admiral's aide, not a tactical officer. But Sulith told me to come because she said she'd learned that when something felt important in a way you couldn't explain yet, you put your best observers in the room. I don't know if I was her best observer. I know I was the one she trusted to remember everything. There were 6 humans in the tactical bay. I had read descriptions of humans. I had seen still images. I had seen 2 video files from the initial contact team, brief ones, mostly spent with diplomats in a room with good lighting and everyone on their best behavior. Seeing them here was different. The first thing you notice is that they don't have a natural resting stillness. Most species, when standing in a formal environment, meeting senior officers, entering an unfamiliar military installation, they find a posture and they hold it. You can see the effort. The body settles into something controlled. Humans don't settle, they shift, they look around, their eyes move, their hands move. The one in front, Captain Okonkwo believe, I recognized the rank insignia. She was standing in what I think was supposed to be an AT stance, but she was also half-turned to look at the holographic display on the left wall, and one of her hands was raised slightly like she wanted to touch it, and she caught herself and lowered it. And then her eyes went to the ceiling and came back down, and then she looked directly at Admiral Sulith, and her expression changed completely. It focused. That was the word. All the restless energy collapsed into a single point, and that point was Sulith, and the look on Okonkwo believe's face went from curious to attentive in about half a second. Captain, Sulith said, welcome to the Meridian Throne. Admiral, Okonkwo believe's voice was different in person than it had been over the comm, warmer. You have a nice ship. The internal gravity's a bit high for us, but we appreciate the gesture. Sulith blinked once. The gravity is standard conclave configuration. Yeah, we figured we run a bit lighter, a slight smile. It's fine, keeps us honest. Sulith studied her for a moment. Then she did something I'd rarely seen her do. She moved to the main tactical display and brought it up herself, without asking an aide to do it. The Varith campaign, she said. Sector 12, the outer ribbon, you have been briefed. We have. Then you know what we're asking. You want us to hold a line, Okonkwo believe said simply. Kelthran siege forces have pushed through the Varith corridor, and they're 3 days from the Conclave's secondary supply depot at Orin Station. Your main fleet is pinned in the Dross Nebula. The gravitational anomalies won't let anything above frigate-class maneuver safely. You need a holding action, something to buy time until your main fleet can reposition. The Kelthran force is substantial, Sulith said. It wasn't a warning exactly. It was more like she was giving Okonkwo believe a chance to react to the information before she said the next part. I read the order of battle. Okonkwo believe didn't change her expression. 14 Kelthran warships, including 2 Crest-class battlecruisers, 6 assault carriers, and 6 destroyer equivalents, against 1 human vessel. A beat. It's a difficult match. We have 3 frigates we can send, Sulith said. Conclave class. They will operate under your direction, but they are small and they will take losses. Okonkwo believe glanced back at one of the other humans behind her. A tall, rangy man with dark eyes and something on his face that was either a scar or a tattoo. I couldn't tell, and something passed between them wordlessly. Then she looked back at Sulith. "When do we leave?" "They left in 8 hours." I watched from the observation deck again. The Perseverance powered up in a way I'd never seen a ship power up before. Most ships, Conclave ships, Ryathi ships, Veth ships, they have a sequence. Power comes up in systems, one after another, in a logical cascade. You can watch a ship go from cold to battle ready, and you see it happening in stages, graceful in its way. The Perseverance came up all at once. Every system at the same time, simultaneous, like someone had hit a single switch and told the whole ship go, and the whole ship had said going. Her running lights came on in a single flash. Her engine spooled from 0 to full output in what the sensors told me later was 9 seconds, which for a vessel her size was not technically possible by conclave engineering standards. She turned in space, again, faster than the numbers said she should be able to, and the 3 conclave frigates fell in behind her like ducklings. And then she jumped. That same fold collapse sound over the resonance pickups, that deep wrong note. And then the space where she'd been was just space again. Admiral Sulith stood beside me on the observation deck. I didn't know she was there until she spoke. "Do you think they'll hold?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she said, and then, almost to herself, "but I think they'll try in a way the Kelthran won't expect." Part 2. The Battle HFY Corridor. What I'm about to tell you comes from 3 sources. The first is the battle recorder extracted from the Perseverance after the engagement. Those are raw data, ship movement, weapons fire, comm traffic, and they're the most factual thing I can give you. The second is the after-action testimony of Commander Priya Sachdev, the Perseverance's executive officer, given 4 days after the battle in a medical bay on Oran Station. The third is something less formal, less official. It's what Lieutenant Jaron Malik, weapons officer, Perseverance, told me personally, sitting in a corridor outside a mess hall, both of us with cups of something hot, when I found him late one night and asked him what it had actually been like. I'm going to try to give you all 3. From the battle recorder, VARITH corridor approach, 3:47 hours. The Perseverance dropped out of fold space 14,000 kilometers ahead of the Kelthran advance formation. This was not where tactical doctrine, conclave tactical doctrine, the only doctrine the conclave frigates had been trained on, would have placed them. Conclave doctrine for a holding action was to establish a defensive perimeter at range and use long-range fire to force the enemy to slow down, to maneuver, to expend energy on countermeasures. Captain Okonkwo believe dropped the Perseverance at 14,000 kilometers, which, in the scale of modern fleet combat, is what a human might call close enough to spit at. The Kelthran formation registered the fold collapse and began emergency evasive maneuvers. They were surprised. Of the 14 Kelthran ships, 12 completed their evasive turns within acceptable parameters. 2 of them, a destroyer equivalent designated Kelthran 7 and a carrier designated Kelthran 4, had been mid-maneuver for other reasons when the Perseverance appeared, and the emergency override of their turn put them in positions that a human tactician would describe as committed, and a Kelthran tactician would describe as temporarily inconvenient. The Perseverance fired before the fold collapse ripple had fully dissipated. From the testimony of Commander Priya Sachdv. The captain's order was immediate. We came out of fold space and she said fire, and Malik fired, and the Kelthran 7 took a full spread from both main rail batteries before they knew what was happening. I was watching the tactical display and I remember thinking, this is insane. We are 14,000 clicks from their forward ships. This is not how you run a holding action. This is how you run a desperate attack. And then I looked at the captain's face and I understood. She wasn't running a holding action. She was running a declaration. She needed them to see us and think, these people are either very brave or very stupid, and we need to figure out which before we commit to anything. And while they were figuring that out, we'd buy ourselves time. It worked, or part of it worked. Kelthrin 7 took enough damage to drop out of the engagement line. Kelthrin 4 was still in the middle of its recovery turn when our secondary batteries got a clean angle on its aft section, and Malik put 2 shots through the carrier's port engine housing. It didn't kill the carrier, but it made the carrier, which was the threat we were most worried about. A full carrier means 16 Kelthrin interceptors. That's 16 more problems we didn't want. It made the carrier stop and deal with its own problems for a while. So in the first 11 seconds of the engagement, we'd removed 1 ship and crippled another. And then the other 12 started shooting back, and things got complicated. From Lieutenant Jaron Malik, personal conversation. He had his cup in both hands. The thing he was drinking was something the medical staff on Oran Station had given him, some kind of nutrient supplement, warm, that humans apparently liked when they were recovering from stress. He'd been awake for a very long time. There was a bruise on his left cheekbone that someone had closed with surgical adhesive, and it hadn't quite finished healing. He said, "You want to know what it was like in that weapons bay?" It wasn't a question. He said it flat like a statement. I said yes. He looked at the cup. "It's loud," he said. "People always ask about the tactics, the targeting solutions, the fire sequencing. And yeah, all of that matters, all of that's real. But the first thing I tell anyone who's never been in a real engagement before is it's loud. Not from outside. From inside, every console gets louder. The ship makes sounds you don't expect. The hull makes sounds. And your own heartbeat gets, you can hear it in your ears, and it's really distracting if you haven't trained for it." He took a sip of the warm thing. "The captain came on the shipwide when we were 40 seconds from fold exit. She said, 'I remember exactly,' she said. 'We are 1 ship and they are 14, and we are going to make those numbers matter less than they think they do.' That's all she said, and she clicked off." He paused. People think that kind of speech needs to be longer, big dramatic thing, but that's what she said, and it was enough, because you knew she'd thought about this. She'd looked at the numbers, and she'd found the angle, and she wasn't standing up there improvising. She knew. Another pause. We fired on fold exit and got the first 2 hits clean. Then I had maybe 3 seconds before the Kelthrin formation got its bearing on us, and I used those 3 seconds to set up the next sequence. We had 6 priority targets queued. She'd given me the priority list during the approach. The Crest-class battlecruisers were at the bottom. I asked her about that, and she said, "The Crest classes are going to be cautious. They're command ships. Command ships want to see before they commit. So let them see. What we need to stop is the carriers getting their interceptors off and the destroyers flanking us. Start with what hurts us fastest." He looked at me. She was right. She's usually right. It's honestly a little annoying. From the battle recorder, VARETH corridor, 3:47 to 4:12 hours. The engagement entered what the battle recorder catalogs as Phase 2. Meaning the Kelthrin formation had recovered from its initial surprise and was now operating with coordinated intent. The Perseverance absorbed fire from 11 Kelthrin vessels simultaneously. In any rational tactical model, this should have been the end of the engagement. A single vessel, Tier 4 developmental, taking concentrated fire from 11 ships including battle cruisers and a full carrier complement. The outcome calculus is simple. You don't need a supercomputer to run that math. A smart child could run that math. What happened instead is that the Perseverance didn't die. The battle recorder is clinical about this. It notes hull stress percentages, shield degradation curves, the temperature readings in the secondary reactor chambers. It notes these things without commentary. But when you read those numbers and then look at what the ship was still doing, still firing, still maneuvering, still generating tactical complication for the Kelthrin formation. There's a gap between what the numbers say should be possible and what the recorder says was actually happening that no one in the Conclave's engineering division has fully explained to me. Part of it was the hull. Human starships are built, and I say this as someone who has now spent 3 months studying the specifications. Human starships are built as though the engineers who built them genuinely expected the ships to take damage and keep operating. This is philosophically different from how Conclave engineers think. We build to avoid damage. We build layered shield systems and deflector arrays and electronic countermeasures specifically so that the hull never has to do the hard work. The hull is the last resort. The hull is what you have if everything else fails. Human hulls seem to be built on the assumption that everything else will fail. The Perseverance lost her primary shields at 3:49. That's 2 minutes into the engagement. At that point she should have been, and I'm using the technical term here, effectively mission killed. A ship without primary shields against 11 active combatants is a ship that is about to be gone. The Perseverance kept fighting for another 23 minutes with no primary shields, and 2 secondary systems degraded. She lost her port engine cluster at 3:58. She reconfigured her thrust geometry, using the remaining drives in a way that the 3 Conclave frigates' AI navigation systems actually flagged as a computational error, because they couldn't resolve how the Perseverance was maintaining the vector she was on given the engine configuration she was reporting. She wasn't making a computational error. She was flying wrong on purpose. From the testimony of Commander PRIYA SACHDV. Losing the port engine cluster was bad. Genuinely bad. We'd taken 3 direct hits in sequence from the closer Crest class. It finally committed when it calculated we were too damaged to threaten it directly. And the 3rd hit took out the port cluster and part of the secondary hull plating back there, and we lost 14 people in that section. I want you to understand. I want whoever reads this to understand that 14 people is not an abstraction. Those are 14 people I knew, 14 names. I knew what some of them were planning to do when they got back home. So, I'm going to keep telling you about the tactical situation, but I need you to know that those 2 things were happening at the same time. People dying. And the rest of us still trying to win. Captain Okonkwo believe ordered the reconfigured thrust pattern immediately. She didn't take a moment. There was no pause. She looked at the damage report. She looked at the remaining drive status, and she said the new course correction numbers out loud, and the helm repeated them, and we were executing within seconds. I asked her later, much later, how she knew the new configuration would work. She said, I didn't know. But it was the right calculation, and the right calculation is the right calculation whether you're certain of the outcome or not. From the battle recorder, VARETH corridor, 4:01 hours. The 3 Conclave frigates had been operating under Captain Okonkwo believe's direction throughout the engagement. At 4:01, the Perseverance sent a new instruction set to the frigate's commanding officers. The instruction set was flagged by the frigate's AIs as tactically non-standard. In plain language, the Conclave AIs didn't recognize what the humans were asking for because what the humans were asking for was not in the tactical library. It wasn't complicated, actually. It was almost simple. Okonkwo believe was asking the 3 frigates to charge. Not in a coordinated formation. Not with fire support sequencing or shield coverage rotation or any of the 47 variants of aggressive tactical advance in the Conclave combat manual. Just charge. At full speed, directly at the Kelthrin Formation Center, and fire everything. The Conclave tactical manual had exactly 1 note on this type of action. It was listed under desperate measures, subcategory psychological disruption, and the note said, use only when all other options have been exhausted and the goal is disruption of enemy cohesion rather than tactical victory. The captains of the 3 frigates debated this for 11 seconds. I know it was 11 seconds because the battle recorder has the timestamp on their acknowledgement signal. Then they charged. From Lieutenant Jaron Malik, personal conversation. The frigates going in, that was the moment that changed it. Up until then we'd been doing damage, yes, we'd hurt them, we'd made them think twice, but we were still being pushed back. They were coordinating better than I expected. The Kelthran formation is good. Their commanders are not stupid, and once they got their composure back, they were managing the engagement intelligently. He set down the cup. And then the frigates went at them full speed, and it was, see, the thing about that kind of move is that it forces a response. The Kelthran couldn't ignore 3 ships coming straight at their center. They had to respond. And responding to the frigates meant rotating attention, and rotating attention meant the part of their formation that had been keeping steady pressure on us suddenly had gaps. He made a shape with his hands, 2 groups of something, and then showing how attention moving from one to the other left space in between. We went into the gap. The captain took us right through what had been the tightest part of their formation, right in close, and at that range we were actually inside the minimum engagement envelope of their big guns. The Crest-class battle cruisers, they couldn't depress their main batteries enough to target us at that distance. So for about 40 seconds we were untouchable by the heaviest fire, and we were right in the middle of them, and we fired everything we had. He was quiet for a moment. It was, I've been in engagements before. I was at the Crucible Station defense, I was at the Meridian approaches. I thought I knew what a real fight felt like. But being inside a Kelthran formation, 40 seconds of just pouring fire in every direction. He stopped. I'll carry that 40 seconds for the rest of my life, he said. I don't know if that's good or bad, it just is. From the battle recorder, VARITH corridor, 4:12 to 4:31 hours. In the 43-second window that Okonkwo believes maneuver created, the Perseverance and the 3 Conclave frigates scored the following damage. Kelthran 2 destroyer equivalent, mission killed. Kelthran 6 destroyer equivalent, mission killed. Kelthran 9 assault carrier, main drive destroyed, carrier removed from engagement. Kelthran 3 assault carrier, severe damage to primary weapon systems. Kelthran 1 Crest-class battle cruiser, direct strike on sensor cluster, partial targeting degradation. This was accomplished in 43 seconds. At 4:15, the Perseverance cleared the Kelthran formation on the far side and came about on a new heading. The 3 frigates had taken casualties. 1 frigate, the Ardent, had lost its captain and was operating on emergency command protocols, but all 3 were still in the fight. The Kelthran formation, which had entered the engagement at 14 ships with full combat effectiveness, was now operating at 9 ships with at least 3 of those 9 in compromised states. At 4:16, something happened that the battle recorder notes as unusual. The Kelthran formation stopped. Not retreated, not regrouped, stopped. All 9 remaining ships went to minimal thrust and held position. For 4 minutes and 17 seconds, there was no firing. From the testimony of Commander PRIYA SACHDV. We didn't know what the stop meant. My first thought was that they were preparing something, some kind of coordinated strike that they needed time to set up. My second thought was that we'd hurt them more than we knew and their remaining ships were reassessing. But that wasn't it. We found out later, from a Kelthran communication intercepted by a Conclave listening station, what the 4 minutes was. The Kelthran fleet commander was trying to get clarification from his headquarters. He was asking whether the tactical briefing his formation had been given prior to the campaign had included any mention of humans. It hadn't. He was asking whether his headquarters had any tactical guidance for engaging a human vessel. They didn't. He was asking what the hell these things were, and where they came from, and why his formation had just lost 5 ships to 1 human cruiser and 3 small frigates. Headquarters told him to use his best judgment. He used his best judgment. He retreated. The Kelthrin formation withdrew from Vareth Corridor at 4:20 hours. The Perseverance did not pursue. She was in no condition to pursue. She sat in the middle of Vareth Corridor with her hull venting trace, gases from 3 compartment breaches, her port drive cluster gone, her primary shields offline, her sensor resolution degraded to 32% of normal, and an internal temperature in the aft engineering section that the Conclave medical team who came aboard later said was higher than human biology was technically supposed to tolerate. She sat there, and she let the Kelthrin formation leave. And then Captain Okonkwo Believe opened the shipwide channel. She said, "Status check. Department by department, give me your people." She went around the whole ship, every department, and each department reported the living, the injured, the dead, and she said the name of every person lost. Not a summary, not a number. Names. And when she was done, she said, "We held, thank you." That was all. Part 3, what they brought with them. Oran Station, 4 days later. I was there because Admiral Sulith had sent me to observe the debrief. I think she also sent me because she knew I would remember it, and she wanted someone to remember it who wasn't just entering it into an official record. The Perseverance had been guided into Oran Station's repair bay on emergency power. She looked, I don't have a better word for this, tired. That's a strange thing to say about a ship, but the scoring on her hull, the way her sensor arrays hung at not quite right angles, the missing plating over the port stern, it looked like something that had fought very hard and was now resting. The crew came off in small groups. I watched them from an upper walkway. Some of them were injured, arms in temporary casts, bandages, the careful movement of people whose bodies were sore in ways they hadn't quite finished processing. Some of them were uninjured physically, and wore it strangely, that slight distance in the eyes that I'd seen in Conclave veterans after hard engagements. But the thing that stayed with me, the thing I've thought about many times since, was the way they moved with each other. A lot of physical contact, not the formal contact of a military unit, not the salutes and the official gestures, the informal kind, hands on shoulders, people checking in with each other, standing close and saying things quietly. I saw one crew member, young, very young, couldn't have been more than 22 or 23 in human years, standing by the station airlock looking like he was having trouble breathing, and 2 people went to him without being asked and stood on either side of him and didn't say anything, just stood there, until his breathing settled. That's not something I can teach in a tactical briefing. That's something you either have or you don't. Captain Okonkwo Believe came off last. She walked down the ramp from the Perseverance and she stopped at the bottom and she turned and she looked back up at her ship. Not for long, maybe 5 seconds. Then she turned away and walked into Oran Station. I followed at a respectful distance. The debrief was held in a conference room that the station commander, a conclave official named Dressani, meticulous person, always overprepared for everything, had set up with full holographic display capability and official recording equipment, and enough chairs for a delegation. Okonkwo Believe arrived with her executive officer Sachdev and her senior staff. 6 humans total. They sat down, they accepted the water that was offered. I saw her check the composition on her communicator first, making sure it was safe for human biochemistry, and then accept it without comment, and they waited for the conclave representatives to settle. Dressani had prepared a 20-minute opening summary of the engagement, based on the preliminary battle recorder data. Okonkwo Believe listened to 9 minutes of it and then said, gently, "Administrator, With respect, what are your questions? We can save time. Dressani stopped, blinked, said, "How did you know they would retreat?" Okonkwo believe looked at him. "I didn't. But the tactical record suggests. The tactical record suggests I made choices that assumed a particular response from the Kelthrin formation," she said. "But I didn't know. I made calculations and I ran the odds and I made the best decisions I could with the information I had. But I didn't know." Dressani was quiet for a moment. Then, "What were the odds in your calculation of a successful holding action?" A pause. "I gave us about a 38% chance of holding the corridor," she said, "and about a 62% chance of buying enough time with the engagement. Even if we lost, that Oran station could prepare its own emergency defenses." Another pause in the room. "You entered that engagement," Dressani said slowly, "with a 38% calculated chance of success." "Of success in the primary objective," she said. "Yes." "And you," Dressani looked at his notes, then back at her, "and you proceeded. Someone had to hold the corridor. I think about that exchange a lot. Someone had to hold the corridor. Not we thought we could do it, not we had a good plan, just someone had to. It's not bravado, that's the thing I've come to understand." You look at Okonkwo believe saying that, and if you're not paying attention, you think it's the kind of thing a soldier says to sound brave. But it isn't bravado. Bravado is when you pretend the fear isn't there, when you perform courage because you want people to think you have it. She knew the odds. She told me the odds. She wasn't pretending the odds were better than they were. She just decided the odds weren't the point. Someone had to. 3 weeks after Orin Station, Conclave Strategic Command, Meridian Prime. The Varith engagement made it to the highest levels of Conclave Strategic Analysis, faster than I've ever seen a single engagement get there. Partly that was because the strategic implications were enormous. The corridor had been held, Orin Station was safe, and the Kelthrin campaign in that sector had stalled because the Kelthrin command structure was now deeply uncertain about what humans were and whether their original campaign plan needed to be reassessed. But partly, I was in enough of the meetings to know this. Partly, it was because the Conclave's senior military strategists were confused in a way they didn't like. They could read the battle recorder. They could see what had happened, step by step. They could analyze the individual decisions and understand, in retrospect, why each one had been made. The tactical logic was coherent once you saw it whole. What they couldn't figure out was how to predict it in advance. "They don't fight the way our models say a Tier 4 developmental species should fight," said senior analyst Voth, in the fourth of the strategy sessions I attended. Voth was brilliant in the way that very specialized people can be brilliant. She knew more about Kelthrin tactical doctrine than probably anyone outside the Kelthrin command structure itself, and she'd built predictive models for Conclave fleet engagements that had an accuracy rate the Admiral Corps quoted to each other approvingly. Every Tier 4 species we've cataloged follows a progression. They begin with defensive dominant tactics because their technology is insufficient for reliable offensive action at those engagement ranges. They develop offensive capacity over time, usually in response to specific strategic challenges. The progression is consistent. We've seen it across 41 species. "And humans?" Admiral Sulith asked. She was sitting at the head of the table. She'd requested the meeting herself. "Humans don't have defensive dominant tactics," Voth said. "Or rather, they have defensive capability. The Perseverance's hull design clearly emphasizes damage absorption, but their tactical doctrine is not defensive. It never has been, based on the historical records the human diplomatic mission provided us." "Explain," Sulith said. "Every tactical choice Captain Okonkwo believe made in the Varith engagement was oriented toward disruption," Voth said. She brought up the battle recorder timeline on the main display. Not destruction. She wasn't trying to destroy the Kelthran formation. Not defense. She wasn't holding a perimeter. She was trying to disrupt their formation's ability to think coherently as a unit. The firing on Fold Exit was not aimed at the most dangerous ships. It was aimed at the ships in the most vulnerable positions, which were also the ships whose loss would require the most immediate tactical reorganization by the Kelthran command. The charge maneuver was not aimed at scoring maximum kills. It was aimed at forcing the Kelthran to split attention. Even the moment she drove into the center of their formation, the highest personal risk point of the entire engagement, the goal was not to destroy ships. It was to be somewhere that forced the Kelthran to deal with a problem they couldn't handle cleanly. Sulith was quiet. She was fighting their decision-making, Voth continued. Not their ships. She was targeting the Kelthran commander's ability to think, making them respond, making them adapt, making them uncertain. And she did it with 1 ship and 3 frigates against 14. Is this in their military doctrine? Admiral Sulith asked. Voth pulled up a file. It's in their history, she said. Over and over. A smaller human force defeats a larger force not by being stronger but by being more complicated. By creating more problems than the opponent can solve simultaneously. By attacking decision-making rather than firepower. She looked at the table. They've been doing this for 3,000 years, on their own world, against each other. Before they ever left their planet, they were practicing this doctrine. Sulith asked me to stay after that meeting. We sat in the empty conference room. She looked at the display, still showing the Vareth battle recorder timeline, and she was doing the thing she does where she's thinking and not hiding that she's thinking. You watched them, she said, on Orin Station when they came off the ship. Yes. What did you see? I thought about it carefully, about the right way to say it. I saw people who'd just been through something very hard, I said, who'd lost people, who were carrying that, and who were still together, still connected to each other. The thing they'd been through hadn't broken the connections it had, I looked for the word. It had made the connections more visible. Sulith nodded slowly. In our fleet, she said, when a ship takes significant losses, the standard protocol is a 3-day stand-down, then an official memorial service, then a psychological evaluation for the crew, then a gradual return to duty. She paused. Because losses fracture unit cohesion. We've seen it over and over. Losses are disruptive to the social bonds that make a unit function. We plan for it. We design around it. Humans don't seem to work that way, I said. No, she said. They don't. She looked at the display. The Perseverance crew's cohesion wasn't fractured by their losses. If the observers' reports from Orin Station are accurate, and I believe they are, the crew was more tightly bonded after the engagement than before it. I thought of the young crew member at the airlock, the 2 people standing next to him without being asked. Their grief seems to be a shared thing, I said, not a fragmenting thing. Sulith was quiet for a long moment. That's going to matter, she said, if they're going to be fighting alongside us, if we're going to ask them to hold more corridors. She looked at me. That's going to matter enormously. Part 4, The Weight of the Blue Star. 6 weeks after Vareth, Captain Okonkwo Belief was back on duty. The Perseverance had been repaired, faster than any Conclave repair yard could have done it, partially because a team of human engineers from the diplomatic mission had arrived to supervise, and partially because it turned out the Perseverance carried approximately 4 times the spare parts inventory that any comparable Conclave vessel would carry. Which Commander Sachdev explained by saying, "We build for redundancy because we know things are going to break," with a matter-of-factness that the repair yard chief found both charming and deeply unsettling. I was summoned to a meeting I hadn't expected. Admiral Sulith had arranged for a conversation between herself, Captain Okonkwo Believe, and 2 members of the Conclave High Council. It was held in a small room, not a conference room, a room with chairs and a window looking out at Meridian Prime Star Field, which meant it was a room designed for a certain kind of conversation. I sat to the side, observer, memory keeper. The High Council members, Councillor Tavith and Councillor Rowe, were both very old and very careful. They had the manner of beings who had made many decisions with large consequences and had learned to move slowly around important things. Councillor Tavith opened it. "Captain Okonkwo believe," he said. "The conclave wishes to express its formal gratitude for the action at Vareth Corridor." "Thank you," she said. "We have been in discussion," he continued, "about the future of human participation in conclave military operations." He folded his hands. "The Vareth engagement has accelerated certain conversations." "I'd imagine it has," she said. "The Kelthrin campaign is not the end of the conflicts we face," Councillor Rowe said. Her voice was quieter than Tavith's, but it carried more weight somehow. "There are other pressures, other fronts. The conclave's forces are substantial, but they are stretched. And there are specific types of strategic problem where our analysis suggests that human capabilities may be particularly suited." Okonkwo believe looked at her steadily. "What are you asking?" "A partnership," Councillor Rowe said. "Not auxiliary support, not borrowed forces. A genuine partnership. Human vessels embedded in conclave fleet structure with genuine tactical authority, full intelligence sharing, coordinated logistics." She paused. "This would be unprecedented. No non-conclave species has ever been offered this." The room was quiet. I watched Okonkwo believe's face. She wasn't surprised exactly, but she wasn't performing unsurprised either. She was genuinely thinking. "I'll need to consult with the ICCN government," she said. "This isn't a decision I can make on behalf of humanity." "Of course," Councillor Tavith said. "But you want my personal assessment," she said. "It wasn't a question." "We would value it," Rowe said. Okonkwo believe was quiet for a moment. "We've been looking for a place in this galaxy," she said, "since we got out here. You all had history, established orders, species that had been spacefaring for thousands of years before we figured out fold drive. And we showed up as the newcomers, and everyone was very polite, and the auxiliary support framing was very polite too, very considerate. Thank you for that. But it was also the kind of politeness that means we don't quite know what to do with you yet." She looked at the two counselors. "Vareth wasn't us trying to prove something," she said. "We went because the corridor needed to be held and no one else could get there. That's all. But I understand that it showed you something. And I think what it showed you is the same thing we've always known about ourselves." "Which is?" Councillor Rowe asked. "We're very hard to stop," she said simply. "Once we decide something matters, we're very, very hard to stop. That's not heroism. That's just how we're built." A pause. "A genuine partnership," she said. "Yes, I think we'd want that. I think that's what we came out here looking for, honestly." A slight smile. "Even if we didn't know that's what it was called. The part I wasn't in the room for, but heard about later." After the formal meeting, after the counselors had left, Admiral Sulith and Captain Okonkwo believe stayed in that room for a while longer. I know this because Lieutenant Malik told me. He'd been waiting in the corridor outside and he could hear them talking. Not the words, just the sound of it, the back and forth, easy and low. He said it sounded like two people who'd been trying to figure each other out, and had finally found the ground to stand on. He said, "I think the Admiral and the Captain just became something. I don't know the conclave word for it, but I know what it looked like." I asked him what it looked like. He thought about it for a second. "Colleagues," he said, "real ones. The kind where you've seen each other in the hard place and you know the other person didn't flinch." Part 5, Legacy. I am writing this 14 months after Vareth. The war is not over. I want to say that clearly without softening it. The Kelthrin campaign has gone better, Oran Station held. The supply lines were maintained. The Conclave's main fleet was able to reposition. But the Kelthran are not defeated, and there are other pressures on other fronts, and the galaxy remains, in its patient and enormous way, full of things that are trying to hurt us. But something changed at Vareth, something that isn't just about the tactical outcome. There are 11 human vessels embedded in Conclave fleet operations now. More are being integrated. The Perseverance is part of Admiral Sulith's direct command group, which means I have now spent 14 months in proximity to her crew, and I have been paying attention. Let me tell you what I've learned. Humans are not the strongest species in the Conclave's alliance structure. The Ryathi have denser muscle mass and higher baseline physical resilience. The Veth have neural processing speeds that make human reaction times look sluggish by comparison. The Drozen can survive in atmospheric conditions that would kill a human in seconds. Humans are not the most technologically advanced. Several species have been in space for 40 or 50 centuries longer. Their fold drive is good, but it's young, and there are nuances in the math that human physicists are still working out. Their weapons technology is functional and in some categories surprisingly innovative, but it's not leading the pack. What humans are, and I've watched this across 14 months, across hundreds of small moments and several large ones, what humans are is connective. Every human I've met treats the space between themselves and another person as something that can be bridged. Not automatically. They're not naive. They have skepticism. They have prejudice. They have all the usual things that living things develop when they've spent a long time in a complicated world. But the default is toward connection, toward finding the thread. I watched Lieutenant Malik spend 3 months becoming friends, real friends. Not diplomatic nice friends, but actual friends, with a Ryathi engineer named Tessavar who had initially found humans irritating because of the restlessness thing. The constant movement, the constant noise. Tessavar had formally requested not to be assigned duties that put her in regular proximity to human crew. By month 3, Tessavar was eating her meals in the section of the mess hall where the Perseverance crew congregated. I watched her from a distance, one afternoon. She was sitting with Malik and 2 others, and they were arguing, loudly, the way humans argue about things they care about but are not genuinely angry about something I couldn't hear. And Tessavar was arguing too, gesturing with her meal fork. And then someone said something that made everyone at the table laugh, including Tessavar, and she made the Ryathi expression that means fine. Yes, I admit this is amusing. Stop looking at me like that. That doesn't happen in 2.5 months between a Ryathi and a species she found irritating. Unless the species in question simply doesn't accept the distance. Commander Sachdev held a small ceremony for the crew members lost at Vareth. 14 names, as I said. She read them out in the cargo bay of the Perseverance, which had been cleared for the occasion, and the whole crew was present. I was there off to the side, because I'd asked if I could attend, and Sachdev had said yes without hesitation, which itself told me something. Each name was followed by a moment of silence. Not a formal official pause, a genuine silence, where you could see people sitting with the specific person whose name had just been spoken. After the last name, Sachdev said, "They held with us. They're on the record now. They always will be." I didn't understand that phrase right away, on the record. I asked Malik about it later. He said, "We humans keep records. Of everything. Every battle, every name, everything that happened. We always have. Even back when we were just scratching marks on stone walls. We keep records because we believe that the things that happened matter, and the proof that they matter is that you write them down and you make them permanent. You make them part of something bigger than the moment." He looked at his hands. 14 people died holding a corridor in a galactic conflict that their grandparents didn't know existed, he said. They're on the record now. They're in the story now. That's not a small thing. For us, that's not a small thing at all. I thought about what it meant, to be a species that had been writing things down for 10,000 years. That had come from a world where everything was written, recorded, remembered. That arrived in the galaxy already carrying the weight of their own history, already knowing what it meant for a moment to be permanent. They didn't need to be here for thousands of years before they understood the gravity of it. They brought the gravity with them. The last thing I want to tell you about happened 2 months ago. Captain Okonkwo Believe and Admiral Sulith were in the tactical room late one night, going over the approach vectors for an operation that I'm not authorized to name in full. I was there because Sulith had asked me to be there, because she wanted the planning session on the record. They'd been at it for hours. Good work, productive. The kind of session where two people who have learned to trust each other's instincts move fast and cover ground and don't waste time. At some point, around the third hour, there was a pause. One of those natural pauses where the work stops for a moment and you remember you're a person and not just a function. Sulith said, in a tone I hadn't heard her use much, "Can I ask you something personal?" Okonkwo Believe looked up from the display. "Yes." "When you came through fold space at Vareth," Sulith said, "and you saw the formation, 14 ships, were you afraid?" A pause. "Yes," Okonkwo Believe said. "But you attacked immediately." "Yes." "Why?" Okonkwo Believe was quiet for a moment, not dodging the question, thinking about how to answer it honestly. "Because being afraid of something and acting despite being afraid of it are two different things," she said. "The fear doesn't go away. You choose what you do with it." She paused. "We've been choosing on Earth for a very long time, in a lot of very hard situations. It's the one thing we've had a lot of practice at." Sulith was quiet. "Choosing," she said. "Yeah." Another pause. "I wonder sometimes," Sulith said quietly, "whether the reason your species reached the stars as fast as you did, reached us, specifically, when you did, is because of that." Okonkwo Believe looked at her. "Because you choose," Sulith said. "Even when the odds are bad, even when the right calculation says the probability is against you, you choose anyway." Okonkwo Believe thought about it. "Maybe," she said, "or maybe we just couldn't help ourselves. We were always going to come out here," a small smile. "We couldn't not."